Hello, my name is Mateusz Mazzini and I'm broadcasting for TVP World straight from the heart of Europe, European Forum Alba, one of the most important foreign policy, security and economic conferences in Europe. My guest now is Melissa Fleming, Undersecretary-General of the United Nations for Global Communications. Welcome to TVP World.
Great to be with you.
Melissa, I want to begin with a rather worrying piece of data and information. According to the Reporters Without Borders Press Freedom Index for the last year, 2023, globally speaking, we have registered a major drop in the political indicator, which refers to the ability of journalists and reporters across different places to report also on their domestic affairs, which means that journalists, frankly speaking, are under increased pressure from their own governments. Where do you think this trend starts and comes from?
I think it's really concerning, and I think it's linked to our whole information ecosystem and also the rise of the digital era and the ability for other actors to fill the information space with their information that is, of course, in the vested interest of whatever power that may be. By contrast, the rise of digital media has meant the weakening of public interest media because of the financial model has kind of collapsed in many cases. So we have fewer, well-funded media organizations, that could stand up and do their job, which is to hold leaders to account. We're working on that, and I hope we can get into that discussion a little bit.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a second, but I want to stay on the issue of safety of journalism. That actually refers to a little extent also to technology, because it's not just about political pressure, it's also the tech. We have more and more countries that use illegal surveillance against their own reporters. Do you think there is a way for them to defend themselves, or will journalism always, kind of by definition, fall victim to that technological development?
Well, journalists who are doing their job are actually producing information and reporting that can be uncomfortable to governments.
The whole purpose.
It is the whole purpose, and governments and in democratic systems believe that is vital to a thriving democracy. Autocrats, on the other hand, find it incredibly concerning to their own power and calling into question their power, and so the tendency is to suppress it. So we are calling for the bolstering of not just the freedom of journalists and the freedom of the press to operate, but also their ability to stand up, to function financially in these kind of environments.
So would you say, therefore, it's high time for us to begin to treat our news ecosystem, our information ecosystem, as part of our critical infrastructure, perhaps even something that touches upon security, just like we treat airports, highways, nuclear power plants? Is this comparable?
That's a really interesting comparison that I've not heard yet. I tend to often compare it to our natural environment. Like if you have a toxic natural environment that's polluted, then human beings and our Earth are not going to be able to thrive. And it's the same thing with an information ecosystem. If it is polluted with disinformation, if disinformation rises to the surface faster than facts, then we're in trouble. It means people lose trust in information. They don't agree on the same facts, and set of facts, and they lose trust. And this is what we need more than ever to build peaceful, just, and healthy societies, is trust in facts, trust in institutions, trust in the media who are delivering the information that is really there for the public good.
That's obviously very important, but I'm afraid this is something that we could possibly focus on more in times of peace. But right now, when we have war returning to Europe for the first time on such a scale since 1945, we know that disinformation, misinformation, propaganda is basically a weapon of hybrid warfare. Hence the comparison. is this really something that governments should try to protect? As in, should governments step in to defend our own news ecosystem? And kind of follow up to that, how do you balance this very thin line between governmental protection and governmental control,
Yeah.
which we obviously know it's against a healthy news environment?
I think most governments have woken up to the fact that when a war is raging in their backyard, there's also going to be an information war. I mean, we've had propaganda from the beginning of time, but of course, with the ability to distribute the same kind of information and to try to manipulate the way people think and feel and a narrative, with using the digital tools that are free and easy to, and cheap, we have these actors can dominate discourse, and that means governments really do have to build up not just their defenses, but their offenses and their abilities not just to detect, but also to pre-bunk and to respond and to be in those information spaces. Also, though, to look at well, I can give an example because I can't speak for individual governments, but I can give examples on behalf of the UN. We have, the UN in many parts of the world is under attack by disinformation actors who are seeking to undermine the UN. This is happening in our peacekeeping operations. It is happening in situations where, we're working to, on climate change and trying to get climate action. So it is undermining the UN's ability to make progress on a number of issues, and including peace and security, including climate action, and including sustainable development, because disinformation actors are finding the work of the UN to be inconvenient to their goals. So we're monitoring this, but we're also trying to respond much more strategically. We're in touch with the platforms. We're making them aware. In some cases, we're asking them to take content down. But at the same time, we're being much more proactive in our own communications. We are getting into those spaces in digital form, but also, through radio and other means. I mean, if they can produce content that is swaying people's minds, so can we. It is a battle. It's labor intensive, it's costly, but we are finding that we are having success in a number of places where people are sticking with the UN as opposed to what those who are against us are trying to.
How worried are you about the rise of artificial intelligence in all this? Because we've already seen in a couple of instances all over the world, be it less developed, more developed countries, deepfakes, an absolute epidemic of very sophisticated tech employed in election campaigns. Do you think that's something that is actually something that the United Nations should try to step in and perhaps regulate on a global level?
Well, we are very worried. I mean, on one hand, there are a lot of my colleagues around the world who are working on health, on vaccines, on sustainable development, who are very excited on education about the prospect of the multiplication effect of spreading knowledge and access to knowledge with artificial intelligence. But there are just as many of us who are very concerned about the dark side. And the dark side, there are multiple potential issues with artificial intelligence, but in the information space, we're already seeing it play out. I'm a parent. I am very concerned about our youth on social media, but I'm also seeing AI being weaponized against young people in the form of sexual deepfakes that are destroying, especially young girls, but even some young boys, social environment, their image of themselves. It's really problematic. What we're seeing also is the deployment of deepfakes in the election sphere, and that is extremely concerning. People are, at worst, at best, they're going to be not really trusting anything, because it's very easy for a candidate to say, That was, if some investigative journalist uncovered something that is uncomfortable about what that candidate
It was
may or
just a
said,
deepfake.
that was just a deep fake. People are not really going to be, before there were tools where you could actually, dig deep, and you could, even as an individual, figure out whether the content, the image was real, when was the picture taken. Now it's almost impossible in some cases to tell the difference between real and fake. And this is being deployed to win elections, to discredit other candidates, but also to instill distrust into the electoral system. So we are very worried about this. We need people to be so aware. We need journalists to be reporting on this. And we need AI companies to be, they need their designs to have these, you can't just sell this stuff off the shelf and let anyone use it and deploy it for whatever means.
I would actually like to follow up on that, because at the risk of sounding perhaps too pessimistic, do you think that organizations such as the United Nations or individual governments stand a chance against global tech companies when the asymmetrical difference between the potential, the technological power is just enormous? How do we hold these companies accountable?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, in the case of the social media companies, they were allowed to grow and rise and expand without any regulation for too many years. Finally, the EU came out with the EU Digital Services Act, and this is being held up as a model actually around the world, and other countries are looking to it. It actually has, it calls on big social media companies to live up to their own standards, but also European standards, and to call them to account. The implementation is going to be really key. There's also an AI Act that the EU has adopted, which is really important, and it is having a ripple effect around the world, because it's very difficult for these companies to make adjustments just for the EU area and not for the rest of the world. So this is a start. It was very late in coming. The social media has done so much good, but a lot of damage. But with AI, we're seeing many governments, including in the US and in others, very alarmed and willing and wanting to take action. We're seeing, the CEOs of the AI companies actually issuing the warnings about the dangers of their own companies. And we're saying, okay, well, you have the power to put, to make sure those biases are not built in, that the information that you scrape is not full of junk, so that when people are trying to find information, they're not receiving disinformation. So, yeah, there is the accountability, just as with the social media companies, by the tech actors. There are the governments that are going to be stepping in. At the global level, the UN is looking at it. The Secretary-General has an AI advisory board, and the Summit of the Future in New York at the General Assembly this year is also going to be looking at AI governance. Hopefully we'll have agreement on at least some global checks and balances, because as with social media, AI knows no borders. You can contain it maybe in one country, but it's going to escape to the rest.
Well, let's stay hopeful a change is going to come in that regard. Melissa Fleming, United Nations Undersecretary-General for Global Communications, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning in to TVP Word straight from European Forum Albach. And stay tuned for more interviews from Austria.